we're going to talk about the hazards of being young, which means that most of us are sitting back and saying, aren't we glad we didn't do that anymore? We're going to talk about Zophar. But before I do that, I want to ask you this question. How are you different than your 25-year-old self? Yeah. Hopefully wiser. Okay. How do we grow wiser? Why are we wiser, you think? Experience tells you something, I hope, at least. Pardon?
Less impulsive.
Okay, less impulsive. We don't quite react quite as quickly as we used to, okay? What else? How are you different?
I'm more beautiful.
You're more beautiful. Well, that's probably true in a certain way, so. Okay. It's interesting. We change over time, don't we? That's part of the deal. So, but let me sharpen the focus. How have your insights into life changed?
Well, I'm now certain that I don't know as much as I thought.
Okay. As somebody said that when you're younger, you have all the answers. When you're older, you have all the questions. And we don't know as much as we used to. Okay. How have your insights into life changed? It's increased, okay. Over time, that builds. Okay, good. Let me ask you this question. How have your emotions changed?
I was younger.
Mm-hmm.
I used to cry all the time.
Okay.
When things went wrong, I'd cry.
Uh-huh.
Now I go, it's okay.
Okay.
I'm going to make it through this.
I'll make it through this, exactly.
I haven't cried in years.
Yeah. Well, so your emotion change. You're not quite as what I call maybe volatile, reactive to things. Okay. How's your emotions changed? We'll go back to that because we're going to get to that. And how have your relationships changed? What's that? You got married? Well, okay. That changes something, I guarantee. So you're more selective, okay? Someone has said that when you're young, you have a large circle of friends. By the time you get to about 60, you begin to pair those off to only the ones that matter to you. And we have a lot of acquaintances that we just kind of shed over time. So we have fewer of them, but higher quality, if you will. Okay? What about other relationships? How have they changed? Okay, you begin to see people and realize that, this is not as bad as what you think it is. You're more patient with them, that you begin to see it from a different person's perspective, from their perspective, not just yours, which is an interesting idea in itself. So we're going to talk about the last of the three friends, but I want to remind you about Job's three friends. They are in order of age. Eliphaz, who is probably the oldest. Bildad, who is probably the middle age, and I'll use middle age for particularly today. And then you've got Zophar, who we'll meet today, who is young. Don't know how young, but everything he says betrays his fact that he's young. And besides that, in Hebrew, old goes first in descending order of age. And so these three friends all come to Job as we've met over the last several weeks. Each has a perspective. Each brings something to them. Here's what they bring. Eliphaz is the voice of experience. Now, we've all had experiences in life. The problem is the more you live, the more experiences you have. And so you begin to evaluate life based upon all the experiences you have. I have seen this pattern before. I've seen this take place before. Now I know what this means. And you don't get quite as concerned about it because experience is there. The problem with experience is that you can misinterpret your experiences. For instance, I have known people who said, I've got 40 years of experience, and the real answer is they got 1 year of experience repeated 40 times. They hadn't learned anything. There are people who don't learn anything from experience. I don't know if you've noticed that or not. But the other is, your experience is your experience. It's what happened to you. It's how you have assimilated life. It doesn't necessarily mean it's what somebody else's experience is. One of the big issues of life today is that we have had people say, this is my experience, therefore it is true for all people, everywhere. If it happened to me that way and that's how I think about life, that's how you're supposed to. You can't impose your experience on somebody else. It's kind of like if you're 65 years old and you're talking to a 30-year-old, you can say, that's the dumbest thing I've ever seen you do. Why did you do that? They don't have the same experience. And so it's different. Bildad, though, is the voice of learning. The voice of learning is different because if you're in middle age, you accumulate knowledge by learning from other sources. You go to school. You start work. You learn things there. You go through some other experiences. In the days of parlance, you listen to the podcast and read blog posts. You're gathering other people's experience, and that's your frame of reference in life. I know because of what I have been taught. Now, the value of education is underestimated, and the value of what you've learned is overestimated. I had a teacher in college who, his view of life was, I loved it because he believed that you could learn something in everything. He was my church history teacher, very bright guy. And I remember the first day of class, he'd say, now understand something. If you make straight A's on every test I give you, but you don't attend class, you won't get anything higher than a D. But if you come every day, do all your assignments, and you fail every test, you'll get a C. Because I believe you can even sleep through this class and gather something up. Well, that's probably true about most people. And so the learning is something we accumulate, but it's not ours. It's when we make it ours that the experience kicks in. And then there's the voice of passion. How do I feel about it? A lot of people, when you're young, that's all you've got. How do I feel about this? It starts in teenage years, goes into 20s, and sometimes into 30s. By 30s, it tends to begin to be a little bit tempered. But the voice of experience, the voice of passion says, I like this, I don't like this, I wish I didn't do this, I don't like doing this, I won't do this. And therefore, when you ask younger people what they think, they'll go, I don't feel good about that. Now, my reproach to that is, and what difference does that make? Who cares how you feel about something? See, you can get a little bit tart if you're not careful. Who cares how you feel? But these are the three voices. And as we age, we apply truth in these three different ways. I'm going to do this morning because the next several lessons, we're going to repeat these cycles. But we're not going to repeat them one by one. We're going to do cycle number 2 in one lesson, cycle number 3 in one lesson. So I kind of feel like I need to pull this together here. As we age, we apply truth in 3 different ways. The voice of youth is the voice of emotion, and therefore we filter truth through all of our emotions. How do I feel about this? When, I can think back when I was a younger preacher, and I was among my peers, 20s and 30s, who in Bible classes, they would come to conclusions. I remember one of them. It was somewhere in 1 Corinthians. And 1 Corinthians is a tough book if you're going to be young because you're going to apply your emotions to it. And that's a really lousy way to talk about the Corinthians. But I remember we were studying 1 Corinthians, and I had teaching another class, and I came back to class the next week, and one of them said, well, since we decided that this is tradition, I said, excuse me, how did we decide that? And one of them looked and said, well, we just liked it that. We just thought that was the way it should be. I said, there was no logic behind it? Oh, yeah, we all talked about it, and that's how it came out. I'm thinking, I want to go home and beat my head against the wall till my ears bleed, because I thought, that's nuts. And I could even see that was nuts then, but every once in a while you'll get and go, I just feel this is the right way. Now, the part of me that probably needs to be suppressed more often would like to say, how do you know that's not the buttermilk and onions you ate before bed last night? Because I don't care how you feel, and God doesn't care about how you feel. That's not how you deal with truth, but you deal with truth how I feel. When you're in midlife, you do education. And so we talked about that, but what happens is when we go to this Bible, we start talking about what commentaries say, for instance. Or worse, the footnote in my Bible says, I just hate study Bibles in class. The reason is because it's like, well, the note at the bottom of my Bible says this is what it is. Who wrote that? Well, it's in the Bible, isn't it? No. Some guy wrote that. And so you begin to use now some of that's good. You have at least hooks to say, here's one thing we know, here's another thing we've heard, here's another thing we've known. So what do we do with all of that? How do we assimilate that information? And then you come to the last one, which is the voice of maturity, which is the voice of experience, and you begin to say, well, in my lifetime, it's been like this. And you have taken all the lessons you've learned. In your 40s, you say, I remember the preacher saying this. In your 60s, you say, this is what I believe. Shift. You've assimilated. You've synthesized all the things that you have learned through life and made them your own. Now, the problem is, you may have reached the wrong conclusion. You may have come to a point where what you're saying is true sometimes, but not always. But you think it's true always. Now, all three of these are imposed on the book of Job, by the way. I want you to think about, as we've talked, Job starts with the oldest, the voice of experience. This is how I see life. This is what I have learned out of life. That's Eliphaz. Then Bildad says, this is what we have learned from the ancients. We've read the books, we've listened to the podcast, we've read the blog post, and this is what the four things we have found out from the study of our work today. That's how he approaches Job. But when we come to Zophar, Zophar is frustrated. He's angry. You know, sometimes you kind of wish that the audio Bible was the first one, don't you? Don't you wish God would have put it all on tape the first time where you could hear the tones of voices? Well, I do. One of the most fun things you can do in Scripture is ask the question, how did this sound when they said it? Well, when you listen to the voice of Zophar, Zophar is going to go, and that presents a fair number of problems. Here's the problem. None of the voices in the book of Job, nor ours, can speak with the voice of God. The best we can do today even is to say, we have studied this and this is what appears to be what God is trying to say. But you never do say, this is what God says because I said it. Difficult thing. Best we can say, this is our interpretation of what God has left, not this is what God told me today. We can't speak with the voice of God. Eliphaz doesn't speak with the voice of God. He's giving his impressions based on his experience. Bildad doesn't give you the voice of God. Why? He's giving you the value of his research. And Zophar can't give you the voice of God because he's too mad about it to say anything better than what he feels in his life. And so you approach this, and that's what happens. So let's meet Zophar. Zophar is interesting. Zophar is not anything like the other ones. And what I think is interesting, he goes third. And when you go third, you've had to listen to the first two. One thing that, this is maybe a personal prejudice, but when you're younger, you get tired of listening to other people, you want to talk. You're ready to talk. Why should I listen to everybody? You listen to all this stuff and you get frustrated, more frustrated, more frustrated. He is an angry man. We're going to find that out. His anger is clear in his speech to Job. It's not very long, but it doesn't have to be very long because it's full of venom. It's kind of like in the movie Inside Out. You know, the character's red, that every time he gets mad, fire comes from his head. Boy, that's Zophar. He's ready to be a blowtorch. You get in front of him. And so he's angry. And then he's also a legalist. Let me define legalist this way. It's not good to define. Legalist is when you create a set of rules that you want to impose on someone else to follow. That's a legalist. It's not following the Word of God the way God says so. It is imposing a set of man-made rules and expecting others to follow your rules. One of the things that Zophar does, he has a set of rules in his head that says, Job, you need to do this. Which creates enough frustration too, because people don't do that. He approaches Job this way. Job, you are ignorant and you need a teacher, so if you will sit down and shut up, I'll teach you something. Now, I want you to pay attention to something. Job is this old, wise man. And Zophar is this young upstart who says, sit down, shut up, and I want to teach you something. How do you react when that happens? You know, when your kids are like 6, 7 years old, and they come home from school, they say, that's not right. My teacher said, and the teacher's 23. Now I'm going, a 23-year-old telling an 8-year-old how life works. Wow. He's in pain. He's suffering. He needs some help. And so what? That's right. He's really painful in this. And so, but this is the approach Zophar takes. He has some assumptions. I'll call them accusations. They're assumptions. Assumptions are things that you believe that you've never tested to see if they're true or not. They're just true because I think they're true, because I believe they're true, because they've always been true. An assumption we make. It's a good assumption. Is it the sun will come up in the east and set in the west? Right? That's an assumption we make. We don't get up in the morning and say, hey, Google, tell me which direction the sun comes up today. Doesn't work that way. It always comes up that way. And so he has these assumptions, the way life is supposed to work. The first assumption he makes is, Job, you're guilty of sin. Now I want you to look at this in Job chapter 11. That's where his speech is. In Job chapter 11, this is what it says, the Zophar says. He says, should a multitude of words go unanswered, and a man full of talk be judged right? You've been talking a lot, Job, but maybe you need somebody to tell you what you mean. Should you babble should your babble silence men, and when you mock, shall no one shame you? The term babble can also mean the term lie. Okay, Job, listen to what he says. He says, Job, you've been doing nothing but lying to us the whole time, and you've been making fun of us the whole time, and somebody needs to put you in your place. How does that work out? Why do you think he's so angry? Okay. 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 For in their eyes, everything's beginning to go downhill because it shocked them that a man like him could go through all of this. Why do you think Zophar is angry?
all saying the same thing.
Yes. Okay.
You've got experience learning and passing
Mm-hmm.
on. I mean, the probability is just low. Right?
Yeah.
Occam's razor.
Yeah.
That's the most obvious explanation.
That's right.
We can have no explanation. Occam's razor says that Job is lying.
Yes. Yes.
He is sin.
Yes.
And especially if we didn't have this, I would think the same thing. There's got to be something
Yeah.
in his passage.
That's right. Let me explain Occam's razor. I like Occam's razor. I know what it is. I use it a lot. William of Ockham was somebody back in the Middle Ages. William of Ockham said that the general principle is the simplest explanation is best. I like that. When you do it, reduce everything to the simplest thing, and that's probably the right thing to do. Anyway, I think you're right that everything tells them this. It seems like that's the best explanation of all of this. If you want to know about Occam's razor, Google.com will tell you everything you need to know. I do not get paid for that advertisement. But it is the simplest thing. And think about what Zophar has been doing. Zophar is one of the three friends sitting there listening to the other two tell Job what he considers to be the obvious. Job, you're guilty of sin. And now he comes and says, what's your problem? Why can't you see this? He's frustrated. He's ready to say, Job, you're just dumb if you can't see the truth in front of you. And that's kind of the way he approaches this. Okay. Yes. That's right. Okay. Okay. Yes. That's a good point to make, and I hadn't really quite thought of it. Fear, you get mad at them because you would like things to get fixed so that you don't have to face the same thing. Because if Job really is not guilty and this is happening to him and I'm not guilty, it could happen to me too. That's a very powerful thing. I think you're right about that. And Zophar, I think the older ones know that more than Zophar does. But Zophar is probably just say, I want to run away. I don't want to talk about this anymore. Job 11 and verse 4 says, for you say, notice what he says? He says, Job, it's only what you say that you're listening to. You're not listening to the voice of God. You're saying, my doctrine is pure and I'm clear in God's eyes. I'm clean in God's eyes. I have you say everything's fine in your life. How could it be fine in your life if you're suffering so badly? See, there's the premise. Remember last week we talked about the logic. If you're suffering, it must be because you did something wrong. So therefore, Job, don't talk about not doing something wrong because you're suffering. Kind of a circular logic. His second accusation is you're ignorant of God. I want you to hang on that word ignorant. You don't know anything about God. He says, but oh, God would speak and open his lips to you. He'd tell you the secrets of his wisdom. For he is manifold in understanding. Know then that God exacts of you less than your guilt deserves. You're not suffering enough, Job. You deserve more than this. I can just imagine Job. What's worse than sitting in this dirt scratching these boils? Tell me how much life could get, how worse life could be. He's basically saying, it could be worse. Really? That's not a very good thing to say somebody's suffering, by the way. Well, it could be worse. And that's what he said. It could be worse. Can you find the deep things of God? Are you smart enough to do that? Can you find the limits of the Almighty? If it is higher than the heavens, what can you do now? Undercurrent. I can. You can't. Zophar, the young man, knows about God all himself. Job is completely ignorant about God. He doesn't know anything. So I need to tell you about God. Now, it's interesting to me to think what he says here is you don't know anything about God when in chapter 2, unbeknownst to any of the people in this story, God knows Job is righteous. And he's not suffering justly. But they don't know that, but they are imposing that's what God thinks. For he knows worthless men. Calling Job worthless. He knows worthless men. When he sees iniquity, will he not consider it? But a stupid man will get understanding when a wild donkey's colt is born a man. Job, when it snows in July, you'll finally get it, won't you? We'll say like this, when pigs fly, you'll be smart. It says, you don't know enough. You're a stupid man. Think about how pounding that is to Job, how powerful that is, how painful it is. But his third accusation is, not only are you guilty of sin and you don't know God, you don't want to change. You're stubborn. You could change if you wanted to, but if you're not changing because you don't want to. Now, Job is always saying, if I need to change, tell me what I've done so I'll know what to change. He says, you know already. If you prepare your heart, you stretch out your hands toward him. If iniquity's in your hands, throw it away. If you've been a sinner, put that in your hand and throw it as far as you can get away from you. And then do spring cleaning in your life. Don't let injustice dwell in your tents. He says, Job, you are morally defective and deficient. You cannot and will not see your own sin. Some people don't. They don't see themselves. Job's not one of those. Job is looking for an answer, but he doesn't know what the answer really is. So Job gets a chance to respond to all this. And by the way, look at what Zophar does. He does it in one chapter. He says, I know that the wisdom of the heavens, and I can put it into a thimble. Yeah, right. So Job makes a response. How would you respond if you were Job? Okay, you'd be angry back, wouldn't you? I think I would be too. Oh, Job, Mike, think about Job. He's been sitting there taking this barrage by all these guys, and Zophar is the last one. So when he responds, he says, no doubt, you are the people, and wisdom will die with you. You guys have all the knowledge in the world, and one of these days when you're gone, we'll be completely in the dark. It's called sarcasm. And boy, he throws it on thick. Yeah, you guys are geniuses. You got it all figured out. But he says, let me tell you something. I know as much as you do. I have as much understanding as you. I'm not inferior. I'm not lesser. And he says, beyond that, who doesn't know all of this? You're not telling me anything new. This isn't any different at all. Why are you telling me this? I already knew this going in. This is what we had all talked about. We had all learned about. This is what we've all believed. We already knew this. But he says, I want you to examine your argument. He said, in the thought of one who is at ease, there is contempt for misfortune. You're giving me advice when you're not feeling any pain. Ooh, there's a zinger. Who are you to advise me when you're not sitting in this dirt scratching sores? How can you know how I feel? You're not the one here, and yet you're dispensing wonderful advice, but you're not in the situation. I do know people who have never been through the situation who try to fix it. I've learned something in my life. This was the voice of experience, by the way, so I'm just telling you. I'm playing Eliphaz right now. I have learned in my life that if you put a wrench in my hand, I can make more trouble in life than anybody else can. So here's what I know. I am so ignorant of that, I pay someone to fix things that I can't fix. I don't know everything. What I know well, but I don't know that. I used to change the oil in my car. That's back when you can do it still. There's not a computer component. But I remember one time I drove the thing off the lift, and I had to have a friend come over with the jack to get me my car off the lift. That's when I said, don't do that anymore. He says, you guys think you know it all, but you don't have any problems. He says, you have said that the sinner is going to be punished. That's what they've said. But the tents of robbers are at peace, and those who provoke God are secure. We all know there are people in this world who are doing fine even though they're reprobates. So why doesn't it apply to them if it's applying to me? An interesting idea. He's challenging things there. For who among these do not understand that the hand of the Lord has done this? In his hands are the life of every living thing and the breath of all mankind. God is the one who has the control, not me. He's the one who can change this, not me. Problem is, that's not what they're telling you. He says, my eyes have seen this, my ears have heard and understood it. I'm not inferior to you. All I need to do is speak to the Almighty so he can tell me if I've done anything and what I've done so I can fix it. But God doesn't show up. You know, one of the things, and we've seen this before, when you're feeling your absolute worst, you don't think God's anywhere around you anymore. God is silent. And he needs God to speak. He says, will you speak falsely for God and speak deceitfully for him? Are you going to give me your answers and say they're God's answers? Will you show partiality toward him? Do you care more about him than you do for me? Will you plead the case with God? If you're so smart, why don't you plead my case with God? Since apparently you're on the same plane with him. Will it be well with you when he searches you out? If you are going to tell me what to do and how to fix my life, if God searches you out, how is that going to be? If the tables are turned, what's it going to be like for you? Yes? That's right. Mm-hmm. That's right.
So often you see people false God.
That's right. They withdraw, exactly. Yeah.
But Job seeks it.
Yes.
Before it without knowing Jesus.
Yes.
He seeks it by the God.
Yeah.
Well, things are going wrong.
Yes. You know, he has, one of the great faiths of Job is that he still believes that God is going to listen to him, that he's seeking that still, not withdrawing from it. And I think you're right that he is that there's a measure of great faith there that we tend to miss, because in pain and suffering we tend to withdraw. If God doesn't care about me enough like that, why should I? Now ponder that for a while, because in your deepest, darkest moments, that thought's going to cross your brain. If God doesn't care that much for me, why should I care for him? He says, everything you've said are nothing but ashes and clay. They don't have any stability to them. Just don't talk anymore. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
He knows he didn't do it. He just
Exactly. He's just trying to understand. Yeah,
wants to take their advice and agree.
yeah. They're not trying to understand. They've already got this figured out. He's trying to understand. Those are two different approaches in life, and figure out what answers do we have or what answers do I not have. It's an interesting idea, and so I think you're right about that as well. Now it's interesting that the friends are nothing but noise in Job's life. They're not helping him. They're static. He can't hear the truth because they keep talking. I always have to ask myself, is it time to not say anything? I've come to the belief that when someone dies, for instance, this is one that I deal with a lot. When someone dies, they need two things from you: your presence and your silence. The presence says you care, the silence says I have no answers. That's all Job wants: presence and silence. And yet they are the noise in the background. But God keeps remaining silent. And he's the one that Job wants to speak to. The day will come. Chapter 38, he wished he wouldn't have ever asked for that, but that's what he's asking for. But he goes on to say there's more hope for a tree. He said if you get a tree and it's got a stump and the stump is dying, he said, but out of that stump you can get a green shoot, because the green shoot's going to seek the water somewhere. And so he said, there's even life for dead trees. He said, but if a man dies, he's laid low. He breathes his last. Where is he? Now, one warning: do not impose New Testament understanding on Old Testament passages. We would look at this next phrase that he uses and say, we already know the answer to that. That's because we know the rest of the story. If a man dies, shall he live again? All the days of my service I would wait till my renewal has come. But if I die, I'm dead. What then? I won't even be as good as the tree. All of Job's friends are judgmental. They all say to him, we know what's wrong with you, Job, and we know how you need to change. You need to repent. I don't know what you've done. You know what you've done. You repent, and everything will go back to normal. But they're making a simple assumption we all make, that we're in control of our circumstances. If you would just do something different, if you would just do something positive, if you would just do this or do that, life would change. Job was not in control of his circumstances. They were imposed on him. And because they were imposed on him, he can do nothing to change them. And aren't we the same way at times? Life imposes things on us that we never chose, and if we don't choose them, we have no control on how to deal with them and get out of them. One of the big issues for his friends is they believe that man has more control over life than he does. So do we. So 3 things we kind of gather from this lesson as we get to a closing. Difficult times, people lose hope. They do. I mean, people go, what's the point? I think I told you the story before about the young woman who attempted suicide. What she said, she didn't succeed, but luckily she said, all I wanted was the pain to stop. That's hopeless. No answers. There's no way out. That's what Job says, if a man dies, shall he live again? I don't know that I have any hope left. In difficult times, give the hopeless hope, not judgment. Don't tell them where they're wrong. Give them something to get them above the waterline. And people who are feeling hopeless, they need somebody, even if it's just through their presence, to say there's going to be tomorrow somehow. And we'll get through a day at a time. And that's the only way you're going to do that. The last thing is, in difficult times, remember that the Comforter is going to be judged as well. Just because you think you know something, one day you'll be judged. Zophar gets this back from Job. Will it be well with you when he searches you? Or you talk about somebody else and their problems. Better clean up your own life. Next week, we're going to go through this whole thing again in round 2. And we'll see some of the same things, but it'll deepen even more. So thank you very much. See you again.